Okay, hopefully I have audio now. Let's see if that works. Uh, good thing I always need a little bit of a pause before people come into the room to let people join. That saved me from the technical difficulties. Please do tell me, where are you joining from as you join the room. We always have a very diverse international audience. Tell me where you're coming from. I'm here in Copenhagen. It's actually a gorgeous warm day. I've been told it's tropical, which is not like Copenhagen. I can't say the same for all of our guests on today's webinar, but I'm really, really excited to see where you're joining from. I see UK, Helsinki, London, Germany, Zurich, Weiler. Amazing. Dubai. Okay, so Dubai is a little hotter than Copenhagen, that's for sure. Poland, Stockholm, UK. Wonderful. So I think we've reached a bit of critical mass. I'm going to start jumping in to our agenda today. A quick introduction to me. My name is Taylor. I do product marketing here at Normative. I've been working at Normative for almost 2.5 years. It's been a real, the time has flown by. It's been a blast. I'm based here in Copenhagen for the last 3.5 years, and I have the privilege of hosting today's webinar. We chose to do a webinar on target setting because these are just becoming more and more common. There's more frameworks, there are more companies setting targets, and it's super important that you set your company up for success by choosing a target that's achievable and realistic. We also know that there's a huge number of these validations for frameworks. We know SBTi, it's one of the ones that we know and love, but there are so many out there. And we really wanted to take the opportunity to provide some background and context behind target setting. And last but not least, emissions reduction is very close to our hearts. And so we wanted to show how once you've set the target, you can then follow through and drive reduction to really meet those targets. So just some quick housekeeping before we dive into the content today. We're going to aim for a 45-minute duration. Those of us who are presenting can sometimes speak for hours, but we really want to respect your time. So thank you again for joining. We're going to keep it a tight 45 minutes, including a Q&A. We are going to record this webinar, so you can look for that in your inbox after the session. We also have time for maybe a 10-minute Q&A at the end of the webinar, so please submit your questions. You can really help us out by using the Q&A feature in Livestorm. It's in the bottom right-hand corner of your screen. If you submit there, it makes it way easier for us to review them and make sure we answer all of them. And if we don't have time to answer it during the webinar, we will get back to you afterwards. And last but not least, we always send out a webinar survey. You'll be redirected to that survey after the webinar. I see someone said they don't hear anything. Please give me a thumbs up if you can hear me. I want to make sure that I'm audible. Thumbs up. Okay, then I will keep going through. I guess we are learning we need a bit more sound practice. Do refresh your page. Thanks, Michelle. But you will be redirected at the end of the webinar to a Q&A, a survey, and share some feedback. We want to make sure that we're creating webinars that are valuable to you, that are going to help you improve. So take a moment and help us out. We have a great agenda today. First, I'll introduce my colleague, Dr. Alexander Schmidt, who is the head of science, sustainability, and research at Normative. He's going to do a high-level overview of why it's so important to set targets. And then he'll hand over to Lucia, who's my other colleague, a senior climate strategist. Lucia is going to talk more about the specifics of how do you actually go through the process of submitting and validating those targets. We have very special guests coming in from Matthew Algie, which is a Scottish coffee company, Eduarda and Amy. I'm going to do an extra intro to them on the next slide because they are our special guests. And then, of course, you've got me, Taylor, your host. I'm going to wrap up with a quick section on achieving targets. What does it take to set them and then achieve them? So, as I said, I wanted to do a special shout out to our guests who are joining us today. Eduarda and Amy, please turn your camera on and join us. Thank you. Could you just give us the quick introduction to yourselves and give a teaser for what we can expect later on in the presentation?
Hi Taylor, hi everybody. My name is Edwarda Christovam. I work for a coffee roaster in Scotland and I'm Director of Coffee Quality and Sustainability. So the supply chain that we work with a lot is green coffee, complex supply chain, obviously importing, moving goods, then producing coffee and exporting and moving coffee within UK and Ireland. I've worked for the business now for 22 years, which feels like a lifetime. And sustainability has always been a strong part of our sort of core ethic and strategy. And I will confess, initially, we started on a pathway to carbon reduction, and you're all going, carbon neutrality. You're all going, oh my gosh, carbon neutrality, how could you? But, times were different and we were exploring what to do best. But over time, that changed. And when we started working with Normative, definitely there were big strategic direction in what we were doing. So we're going to tell you a little bit about our journey and how we got from carbon neutrality to carbon reduction, and hopefully it will be useful to you.
And I'm Amy Fordham and I'm a sustainability analyst. I joined Matthew Algie in January and I'm in charge of all of the carbon accounting data and collecting the data and uploading it onto Normative. So I'm going to talk a bit about that, a little bit about what we found and what the challenges were.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. So with that, let's dive in. I wanted to do a quick poll before we start on the content. We know that this is something that many businesses are at different stages of setting a target. So let us know where you're at. We will hold for about a minute to give you a chance to respond. Once again, you can find the poll in the bottom right-hand corner of your screen. And this is so helpful for us to really see where you're at, really help us understand what questions should we try and get to and go from there. And with more and more votes coming in, I see the majority, over 50% of you have not set targets yet, but you plan to. You're doing the first step right here by being here. We have 10 people, about 25%, who have set targets, and only 2% who have set a target and validated your target. So huge kudos to you for setting and validating your target. Everyone else, thank you so much for joining us. We hope we can provide you some really helpful information. It is my job as a product marketer to give you a quick introduction to Normative. Our mission at Normative is to make known and reduce the sustainability impact of all economic activities on the planet. And we come from a really diverse background. We were founded in Stockholm in 2014. We've been around a really long time. Being in the Nordics, based here, sustainability is really core to our practice. The other thing that's important is science. We really pride ourselves on our scientific integrity. So we collaborate with international climate groups, we collaborate with other industry people, and that helps us inform really scientific-based carbon calculations. And then, of course, we have enterprise experience that our colleagues come from places like SAP and Peakon, both really big established players, but also new upstart startup types. And so we integrate all of that into a really dynamic team. And what we try and do, everything that we bring to the table, is to make it possible to see the carbon in your carbon footprint. We really believe that without this visibility into the carbon, there's no way to bring your team together to really align and orient yourself around what you need to accomplish, what your target needs to look like in order to reach net zero in 2050. And so everything we do, we try and make this possible. And I'll give you a very quick preview at the end of this webinar on exactly how we do this. Our approach, as I said, we pride ourselves on our scientific integrity. All of the data that we generate, we strive to make it responsive to your business. I think Matthew Algie will probably have a few things to say about this too, that the data isn't really meaningful unless it really reflects what your business looks like. We also do connected and continuous action. And I think that's why we're all here today. It's not just looking at the data, it's not just understanding the data, but it's actually turning it into insight that you can use to collaborate with your team, with leaders, with stakeholders, and suppliers in your value chain. So through all of these factors, we make carbon visible, we make it possible to manage, reduce, set targets, report, all of that great stuff. And with that, I'm super happy to hand over to my colleague, Alex. Alex, please give us a quick intro to you and then kick us off.
Thanks so much, Taylor. I hope everyone can hear me well after we've had some issues there, apparently, for some of you. Thanks for the thumbs up. So I'm Alex. I'm heading Normatives, Science, Sustainability, and Climate Research team. In that capacity, you already heard Taylor mentioning it several times, scientific integrity. That is pretty much what I'm here for at Normative, besides some other outreach with policymakers and researchers. So not too much on me, because we already heard from our exciting guests and customers there that I'm pretty sure you are very much looking forward to hearing more about. So let me just give a bit of a baseline, a bit of a scene setting, because we've seen that around half of you have not yet embarked on the target setting journey. So it might be interesting to just think a bit about targets in the first place. So what I want you to start with is, if you think about your business in the year of 2030, which targets would you set for yourself? You might have in mind some growth targets, some market targets, some product targets maybe. But I assume that these targets will be quite high level, rather vague maybe. And that's probably useful for you because you want to keep a certain agility there in how you move forward. And I would challenge you on one metric, and that is the metric around carbon, where it is quite important to set really clear targets now, already now, for a target in 5.5 years. And why is that the case? Well, because, among others, we have a clear planetary imperative to act now. The science is clear on this. We have mapped out these 9 planetary boundaries, which, if we cross them, we really risk destabilizing the entire Earth system. We have already crossed 6 out of these 9, and there are all these interdependencies happening right now around the world with real-world physical impacts. So that's really, really important to understand. It is not just, quote-unquote, about protecting trees, the environment, nature, biodiversity. It is literally about being able to sustain your way of doing business across supply chains. Because the more of these thresholds that we cross, the higher the risk of natural disasters and other things that will destabilize your supply chain. As I think most of you are already probably a bit painfully aware of, there are also more and more regulations coming in. So policy has realized the need to be more stringent there and to take more the corporate sector into accountability. So we have just mapped out a few acronyms here. You might have heard some of them. We're happy to dive into them further, but just to show both in the UK and the EU, of which I believe the majority of you right now is dialing in from, we have a lot of requirements ramping up that ask companies to disclose their emissions very comprehensively and to set targets. And last but not least, not to have the doom and gloom scenarios there for you, but really also to highlighting, hey, this is an opportunity for your business. It is not just about mitigating risks. It's actually about what are investors looking for. What can we do new product engagements in? And ultimately also, how can we win over more customers, retain our employees over longer term? And all the numbers speak clearly for there is a big appetite in the market for sustainability, and of course for good reasons, because this is the future of business. It will be linked to your own sustainability agenda, inevitably. So if we take this as a starting point, then realizing that 2030 is already a very, very important date for us to set targets, then what does it mean? Why 2030, and how do we actually set scientifically sound targets? Because we all agree, as much as no one has helped with just setting random targets of which you have no idea if they're reasonable for yourself, and also if they're actually useful, quote unquote. I pulled out some stats here from our partners from Oxford Net Zero, and a certain overview they have that they maintain, where we see clearly that commitments towards net zero are ramping up. And we did our own little study on top of this that actually kind of shows that we have almost 80% of global industry emissions already covered by net zero targets. So we have a lot of targets already set. However, right now there is a lack of action and actually realized reductions. So that's why it's so important that those targets are scientifically grounded and you have an action plan behind them. It's easy to just say, I'm going to be net zero by X. But actually, what does it mean? How do I get there? What's my transition plan? So there's a lot linked to setting a scientifically sound target and following up on the target. Because this is the huge task ahead of us. This is a curve, a lot of lines there, but what it shows here, or what it should illustrate to you, we on the left-hand side, where we are still increasing emissions. Actually, last year, the IEA, the International Energy Agency, just brought out figures roughly around I think even a bit larger than 1% of increase again in global emissions. While what we need is more than 7% of reduction year on year. So that's a huge task for us all to bend the curve, to really go to this exponential decrease in emissions. So using a scientifically sound transition plan is crucial after you have set your target. My colleague Lucia will in a second go into certain kind of implications of scientifically sound target setting. I just want to give you a few of those high-level names on the right-hand side that are credible frameworks that you can align yourself on, depending on, you see a bit here, your industry. For example, finance has a special group that is working on supporting with target setting. For larger enterprises, of course, science-based targets, which again, my colleagues of Lucia will dive into further, but also small and medium businesses. There are entry routes for you through, for example, the SME Climate Hub to set targets and to get support, which is, of course, especially important for those smaller companies. But in essence, just three main things: align your targets with the UN Race to Zero 3.0 starting line criteria, look at the ISO standard for net zero, and the SBTi corporate net zero standard. This is, of course, now just throwing this at you to look into these, just because we won't have time to dive further into each of them. But I want just to highlight for you, it is not just done by setting some kind of target. There are frameworks, however, who help you. And luckily, my colleagues of Lucia will now guide you a bit further into what it actually means to submit and have your targets validated in a scientifically sound way. Lucia, over to you.
Thanks a lot, Alex, and hi, everyone. My name is Lucia. I work as a senior climate strategy advisor at Normative, and I've helped quite a few of our clients to set science-based targets. So I'm excited to tell you more about the submission and the validation of climate targets today. So it is crucial to set targets in alignment with latest climate science. And as we heard from my colleague Alex, there are various frameworks available that can guide this process to ensure that targets are science-based. And these standards and frameworks, they share the same goal based on the Paris Agreement and IPCC reports. And that goal is halving emissions by 2030 and reaching net zero by 2050 the latest. So whilst each of the target setting frameworks might differ in greenhouse gas inventory requirements or target setting options, they all share the same ambition of limiting global warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius. Generally, companies should set both near-term and long-term or so-called net zero targets. As per the SBTi, near-term targets are greenhouse gas mitigation targets that aim at achieving critical emissions reduction within 5 to 10 years from the base year. The ISO Net Zero guidelines call these targets interim targets and prescribe 2030 as the target year. Long-term or net zero targets, they show the level of reduction needed to achieve net zero by 2050 at the latest. And they drive economy-wide alignment and long-term business planning to achieve the emissions reduction required to meet global climate goals. So how do you go about preparing your greenhouse gas inventory for target setting? The most important factor to ensure the targets can be acted upon and achieved is having a complete carbon baseline with high-quality data in place. The chosen base year inventory should be representative of a company's typical emissions profile, and it should allow meaningful comparisons with future years. The SBTi and ISO detail very clearly what requirements a greenhouse gas inventory needs to fulfill to use it for target setting. So when assessing your carbon baseline against these requirements, it's good to pay special attention to the data quality, especially in top emitting scopes and categories. Over time, those top emitting operations and activities should be assessed with activity data, supplier-specific data, or even product-specific data. And this way, you can ensure that the effect of reduction initiatives and also the year-on-year progress towards climate targets will be visible in your greenhouse gas inventory. So the basic function of climate targets is, of course, to guide your company's reduction efforts and to define success. And there are different types of targets that companies can consider, and I will briefly explain some of them. The first one is absolute targets. And this is the most common target setting method, which ensures that companies deliver absolute emissions reduction in line with the 1.5-degree pathway. An example for an absolute target would be to reduce Scope 3 emissions 50% by 2030 from a 2020 base year. The SBTi offers a few more target setting options. One of them are emission intensity targets. And intensity targets, they set an organization's emission target relative to an economic or an operational variable. And this could be a physical intensity target, and then a company reduces the emission intensity per product produced. Or it could be an economic intensity target. And here the aim is to reduce the emission intensity per unit of revenue generated. The last target type I want to mention is supplier engagement targets. And this type of target is specific to the SBTi near-term target pathway. And with this method, companies commit to a certain percentage of their suppliers setting science-aligned targets within 5 years from the base year. So once you have chosen and then modeled your target, you can think about whether or not you would like to validate your targets. So both the SBTi and the ISO Net Zero guidelines are publicly available. And this enables companies to set science-aligned climate targets, even if they choose not to validate them through a third party. So why would companies choose to have their targets validated? Climate targets manifest a company's commitment and ambition to reduce emissions in line with climate science. Getting those targets validated can help to hold a company accountable internally, and it can motivate different departments to work together and to achieve year-on-year progress towards targets. Getting targets validated furthermore increases trust by external stakeholders that targets are ambitious, achievable, and in line with climate science. It also underlines the completeness and accuracy of your greenhouse gas inventory if you have your targets validated. Since during that validation process, your greenhouse gas inventory gets thoroughly reviewed and quality checked. But now it's time to leave the theory behind us. And I'm excited to invite Eduarda and Amy from Methodology to the conversation. So Eduarda, could you tell us a bit more about Methodology and your target setting journey?
Of course, Lucia. So Methodology has been around for quite a long time. We're 160 years young this year. So We started out as a tea company, moved to becoming a coffee roaster, and that is now the bulk of our business. So we source, roast, and supply coffee to businesses across the UK and Ireland. So we have a complex business. It's not just a coffee roaster. So we provide also equipment, service support, training, and expertise needed to run a coffee business. So we have engineers who will service equipment, traveling around the UK, parts necessary for machines. And we also have a catalog company that sells teas, drinking chocolate, snacks, so a variety of products, not just coffee. So it makes our sort of business model a complicated business model to manage in terms of carbon emissions. The good thing for us that allowed us to progress sort of easily into carbon accounting was that sustainability was at the core of our business for many years, especially when it came to green coffee, and reducing our environmental impact has been something we've been working on for many years. So we have environmental targets set every year. We review them, we try to achieve them. We are audited on them, so we proactively try very hard to engage our staff and our teams to make sure that those are achieved. And we very early on, 2 years ago, we aimed to achieve net zero by 2040. And you might think it's possibly too ambitious, but in Scotland, actually, the target is 2045, unlike in England, for example. So again, like many businesses, I imagine, you're also being pressured by customers. So we have a lot of customers who decided to have much earlier net zero targets, which led us to have to review our own strategy. So initially 2045 was our aim, and we brought it earlier to 2040 to be in line with some of our customers. So our net zero plan was the first thing we engaged in. We created a roadmap, and we wanted this roadmap to be easier to understand by staff. And I think if we had started without it, it would have been really hard to be able to set carbon reduction targets. I think internally, both teams, management and senior management, and sort of everyone, all staff engagement, people wouldn't really understand what that means. Because although we were measuring our carbon emissions year on year for quite some time, I don't think people, they forgot, once we told them, oh, these are our carbon emissions for the year, it becomes really difficult to quantify what does that mean. So now 2040 is our big milestone for net zero, and we have milestones every 5 years. This poster is everywhere in our business, and it allows people to relate, so they can actually look at some of these objectives and refer to their own job descriptions, to their roles, and say, oh yeah, I can impact on that. Yeah, I've changed that already. We've achieved that one. So without this, I don't think we could have been in a position to set up reduction targets. So I feel that this was the first step to make this carbon reduction plan easily understood and accepted by our business, I would say. But of course, having someone who is collecting data all the time was essential. And Amy loves data, so it was a perfect marriage of two ambitions. Amy came from this sort of fresh from university, really wanted to make a change, wanted to make a difference, and she wasn't at all scared to deal with a business arc charge, who can be a little bit corporate and set up meetings and agreements with certain departments. And I would say, Amy, without it, we wouldn't have been able to start collecting data that allowed us to get to this point. And Amy, how did we get here? It was, I don't think it was that hard.
No, I don't think so.
Setting targets. I remember the first meeting we had with Johnny on, have you considered setting your targets? And I was a little bit intimidated by it. I thought, how are we going to do this? And what targets are we going to set? But actually, once we went onto their SBTi website and we started looking, and you put the trust in a science-based target. So you know what your emissions are, you know what your end result is going to be, what you want to achieve. And actually you have to trust that this is a really realistic figure for us to work with. It's ambitious. When you look at the percentage of emissions we have to reduce, it can feel a bit scary, but it has to be done. So it wasn't that difficult, I think, for us. I feel relief now that the target is set, I have to admit, because before we were talking about this is our carbon bill for the year, this is how much carbon we have generated. But now we can refer to, look where we are on our journey, we have to reduce it by this much. And if people find it hard, we can revert back to the roadmap. Does that answer your question, Lucia? Does that give you a good intro to sort of how we work towards this final setting of targets, which in the end was not that scary, to be fair.
That is an excellent introduction. Thanks a lot. Yeah, because I'm sure that many of our listeners today are a bit nervous about the process of target setting, since it involves a lot of data. But great to hear that you feel relieved now that you have those targets in place. Amy, I would like to ask you, what was the most surprising thing that you've uncovered during the carbon calculation process?
I think, like, prior to this, I'd never calculated carbon emissions in the way that we do here, and seeing how much of a contribution Scope 3 emissions make to our final carbon output for the year. I think it's something like 96%. And yeah, I think it's also interesting looking to see which elements of these Scope 3 contribute towards the overall emissions, and how we can try and tackle Scope 3, so we can control within our own operations quite easily our emissions, but seeing that over 95% of our emissions that we produce is Scope 3, so you come from other suppliers, understanding what they are and how we can then address them, I think is really interesting.
I thought that one of the things that was interesting is that as our data got better, so as we were using more activity data than spend data, from one year to another, the profile of those suppliers who were contributing more to our Scope 3 changed. And then suddenly you go, where did that come from? You know, why are they now top? What is it that they do? So, and that sort of getting better at the data suddenly gives you a much more detailed view of where your carbon emissions are coming from. So that surprised me. I wasn't expecting that, but obviously good data means, you know, good information that's coming through when we know where those emissions are coming from.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Thanks for sharing. As part of this process of calculating your emissions and setting targets, was there anything that was particularly challenging, and how did you overcome the challenges along the way?
I think getting the data, which seems so silly to say, but I think sustainability is not a massive part of everyone's job descriptions. So for us sitting here, it's a huge part of what we do every day. But in order to communicate to other people within the business that this is why we need the data, and I'm not just asking you to do something that means nothing, and having like an open dialogue with members of staff and seeing telling them what data we need, why we need it,
in what format.
Yeah, and what format is really important. And it was quite difficult at the beginning because the data in the format we needed isn't readily available. It's not just a click away. So we've set up, at the end of calculating our 2023 emissions, we set up a plan of collecting all the data quarterly. So it's I was going to say quick. It's not quick, but so that
easier.
It's a lot easier than scrolling through thousands and thousands of pieces of paper at the end of the year. And it all comes to me and I store it. And then when it gets to the end of the year, hopefully for next year when we calculate it, it should be a lot easier and a lot quicker.
It may sound, everyone might be listening and thinking, oh yeah, we do that too, but to us at the start, just to engage internally, sometimes in the finance team, we need access to invoices. Why do you want to see the invoices? And explaining, and even the language, having to simplify the language so that people would understand what it means. I thought that was hard, when people just get used to, carbon neutrality and think that's a great term. And then suddenly you start, no, let's think, let's talk about net zero, and to people to understand, okay, I understand now why you need it. Sounds important. Okay, I'll let you see the data. Setting up those meetings was brilliant. Amy managed to get a lot of buy-in, and that made life so much easier.
great to hear how you involved all of the different departments and your colleagues into the process of carbon calculations. I have one follow-up question. I'm really curious about how did you achieve that everyone in the company felt confident about the targets that you ended up setting?
I actually think it's more about trust than people understanding what the targets, that 63% or 9% actually mean. I think because we do what we call lunch and learn sessions, so they're short sessions, bite-sized, people can be having their lunch at their desk and they're listening in, and we try to demystify, sort of use, because the audience is broad, it could be someone from logistics looking at the presentation, someone from finance, so we try to make it approachable and we explain what we're measuring, so what our carbon emissions are made of, how much it is compared to the previous year, and we try to relate it back to activities we've had in the business where staff have been pledging, for example, to reduce electricity use, to reduce the air travel, to use public transport more, to use the train, and then they see that those changes that they've made over the year have actually had an impact on our carbon emissions. And that's so satisfying to see. They understand that, they can see it relates to my job. So that becomes easier for them to understand. So that's why I mean the roadmap is a visible, colorful, it has things that people can relate to. Behind it are the carbon reduction figures. Without those reduction figures, we wouldn't be able to make that roadmap exist. But to communicate, the roadmap is really useful. So I think we have trust. And because we trust in SBTi and a science-based target, we ourselves are not questioning whether that percentage is too high or too ambitious. So that takes the pressure off because it's an independent body and it's a science-based target.
Thanks a lot for sharing. Final question. We heard there are many in the call today who have not set targets yet. Is there any final advice that you would like to give to everyone who's just starting out?
I would say really ask the silliest questions you can think of when you're going through your chats with Normative. We found Johnny really, really useful because he's our contact and really encouraging as well. And then we try to translate and it's trying to translate all that knowledge back into the business so that there's buy-in from the business. Setting the targets was scary at the start, but once you do all the activities, all the work, you have to achieve those reductions. Once you put your faith in the SBTi, science-based target, I think it takes the pressure off. Now what I'm worried about is delivering the reductions, but I know that has to be done. So I would say just really go for it, because without setting the targets, whatever activities you're running, they won't mean very much because you don't know whether you're achieving the right amount of reductions in your carbon emissions. So now we know whether our baseline is 2023, so we'll know whether we're reducing fast enough. And we plan to validate. That's our next step. So we've done it in small steps and
it's quite simple to actually do it. And then once you've got the targets, you can map your impact a bit more.
Absolutely.
So you know that you have to hit this by that time, and it's all data based, really. So it's easy to map.
And once you have that reduction target in place, you can go to your commercial director and tell them the financial impact that not reducing is going to have on this business. So you can talk about how to include in the budget for every year your investments and how you have to achieve year-on-year reduction. Otherwise, your bill is going to be really hard. Once you turn it into numbers, into actual physical bill, your commercial director will start listening. And that's really useful. That I found that very, very useful.
Yeah, thanks a lot to both of you for sharing those insights. And I'm sure hearing about those experiences was very valuable to everyone in this webinar today. I will hand back to my colleague Taylor now.
Hello, it is me again. And I have the chance, first of all, to thank Amy and Eduarda. It is so inspiring to hear these stories about target setting. You make it sound remarkably easy. We know that you put in a ton of hard work behind the scenes. So huge, huge kudos and thank you for sharing with us. I think we could have kept that conversation going for a long, long time. Really quick, I'm just going to wrap up with talking about taking a step back for a moment and summarizing a bit of what our general recommendation looks like here at Normative. When it comes to actually achieving those targets, of actually making the reductions necessary, we first of all recommend getting as comprehensive a carbon data as you can. You need that foundation. As Lucia mentioned, the carbon baseline is what you need to really effectively set targets, which is step 2. And last but not least, you've got to create and implement reduction initiatives. And reduction initiatives are these little projects where you identify where can I make a swap of one high emitting activity to another, or where can I find an efficiency? Where can I do something with using less energy or less fuel? And a few things that we have in Normative that I think are really important when you're looking for a solution or thinking about how do you do this long term is first of all thinking about all of your scopes. As Amy said, they found that 95% of their emissions came from scope 3. It's really important when you're looking at reductions over time and when you're looking at your emissions to have scope 1, scope 2, and those supplier emissions in scope 3 to make sure you're looking at the whole picture. Then when it comes to exploring reduction initiatives, you need solutions to be able to kind of swap. You need to be able to look at if this is our business activity, this is the material, and this is a lower emitting solution. You need to be able to make those swaps. And here at Normative, we have over 40,000 emissions factors in our database. So we want to make it really easy for you to be able to swap from one to the next and see what impact that will have on your holistic carbon footprint. And then last but not least, it's so important to be able to actually verify that you're having the progress that you want to see. And so every single year, whether you're looking at the level of the office, the region, the product line, you want to be able to zoom in and see, is that reduction initiative that we designed, is it having the impact that we expected? And that is it from us today. I think you heard a ton about all of the reduction frameworks, or the target frameworks that are out there. You heard our story. If you want to talk about this more, if there's anything more that you can learn from us, feel free to book a consultation. You can talk to someone like Lucia. We're going to put a little pop-up on your window in case you want to learn more and connect with us. And we love talking about this. Like, if it's not clear, we're all very, very passionate and love to hear every single unique opportunity out there for reduction. And Q&A, I really apologize. As I predicted, we end up talking more than we can, more than we typically have time for, but we did get a few really, really good questions. And I promise if we don't get to it in the next few minutes, we will respond via email. So I think there were a few interesting ones. And would everyone, all of our speakers, please turn your cameras back on for our last few minutes of Q&A. Alex, there were a few questions around legislation. A question around UK legislation and targets, as well as restrictions for choosing a base year. Could you tell us a bit more about those?
100%. In brief, because I understand legislation is top of mind for everyone, we won't get into the details for this. There is a legislation tracker on our homepage. Maybe our colleagues can share the URL here for everyone to just keep track of the most important frameworks. Right now, in most jurisdictions, UK, EU, SMEs, small medium enterprises, are usually not directly affected and included yet. However, two things: enterprises will be more and more affected, and they in turn, of course, will ask SMEs, so their suppliers, to disclose. So you have to be prepared for that indirect mandate to disclose emissions. And secondly, also more and more jurisdictions are thinking about including SMEs directly in obligations. So find out more on our legislation tracker, and we hook you up also with resources there like the BCC, which helps you with the calculations if you are an SME and have not yet started with anything.
I'd love to throw one at you, Lucia. We had a question: how can you ensure a target is ambitious enough without being non-achievable?
Yes, that's a great question, and one that I think needs to stay present in the whole process of target setting. So target setting frameworks usually set certain ambition thresholds or minimum requirements, and that's a must achieve, so to say. But then, of course, it's encouraged that companies set more ambitious targets. And when it comes to assessing the feasibility of driving reductions at that rate, it's really important to address it across the whole company. So carry that conversation to the different teams that can actually influence reducing those emissions, so that everyone feels comfortable with the targets set and knows what's along the way.
And I think let's close up with Amy and Eduarda. There was a question here about how did you get acquainted with carbon accounting? And I think that this is such an important question because this is such a new thing for so many of us. And you are our content experts here. How did you both learn about carbon accounting?
We started in 2021, and we looked, I think like many people, trying to find a partner for carbon accounting is looking around to see what's possible. And we had a different carbon partner at the time. And then we felt that that relationship wasn't, because we were focusing mainly on scope 1 and scope 2, not so much on scope 3. And we just felt that wasn't tenable. We wasn't going to deliver what we needed in terms of reductions once we decided our strategy had to be net zero rather than carbon neutrality. And then we did research. We did a lot of benchmarking of different carbon accounting partners. And in the end, having had meetings and presentations with everyone, actually Normative was the one that we selected because we felt that it delivered everything that we need. It was incredibly credible. We just liked the way it was introduced to us. We liked what was included in our contract and what we were going to be focused on. It was very clear how we were working together, and that's what we chose. So when we started working with Normative, initially, I think our contract was for a year, and then of course when we had to renew, we renewed for much longer because we trusted the relationship and the partnership. And you tend to know the person you're working with, and they become familiar with your business. And sometimes we have challenges because coffee roasting is not so easy as a product. So sometimes, and we're honest about it, we have a look, okay, it doesn't quite exist in the engine, but the closest we've got is this. And we know that in the future that may change. And we like that approach. It's an honest approach. There's transparency to it. And I love the section at the end. I got very excited about this because then you're able to reach out to your suppliers through the Normative portal. So you know which ones are, for example, your 10 top producers of carbon that are affecting your scope 3, and you can reach out to them through the portal. And we've had some responses, not as many as we would hope, but we hope that will grow, but it keeps everything together. So to be able to do that and then to have someone say, oh yeah, here's our carbon emissions for the year, and we compare to what we projected for them. Oh, obviously they've done this better. We probably overestimated or underestimated. Now we can trust this data more. I quite like that function personally.
And I think it's really important to say as well that the system that Normative has is quite simple to use. Mm. When I first joined, it was, this is your first task. And as at that time the sole member of the sustainability team that worked full time, I literally just read the methodology, logged onto the portal, and it's not always easy, but it is quite self-explanatory in the way that Normative collects the data, and that there's examples of what type of data you need and in what format in a sheet, and you just literally link the spreadsheet to the portal and it does it all for you.
And it's quite easy to spot if there are duplications as well, which we quite like. Okay, that doesn't sound good. That doesn't look right. There's obviously a duplication there. And it picks out all the spelling errors that I made when I spell companies' names wrong, and it comes up as a duplicate, and you can just combine them really easily.
Thank you so much. I promise, audience, I did not plant that. That was genuine. Thank you so much. I am sorry we didn't have time to get to more questions. I realize we're over time, but we do have all of your contact from when you signed up. So we promise we will get back to you if we didn't have a chance to get to your question now. Just before we wrap up, a really quick shout out to next month's webinar. We're going to look at global regulation. As Alex, our head of the Science, Sustainability, and Climate Research team knows, this is a constantly changing field. I'm sure you know this. Please join us in July if you're interested. It's going to be another great webinar. And with that, I'm saying goodbye. Thank you again to all of our speakers. Thank you, Alex, Amy, Eduarda, Lucia. Thank you for everyone who joined. It's a pleasure to get to do these webinars, and have a wonderful Thursday.